Hey there, fight fans. John Pollock here with you. Later on, Robin Black is going to be by as we chat today's news, including Randy Couture's criticism of the UFC, two big heavyweight bouts set for Memorial Day weekend, and Vitor Belfort added to another international card. UFC President Dana White has announced that Luke Rockhold will make his UFC debut later this year against Vitor Belfort in middleweight action. Rockhold, the final Strikeforce middleweight champion, has not fought since July of last year, while Belfort is coming off of a stoppage victory over Michael Bisping in January. The date of the event is unknown, but it was revealed that it will take place in Brazil. Two big heavyweight bouts were announced this past week on UFC Tonight, as Cain Velasquez will defend his heavyweight gold against Antonio Bigfoot Silva on Memorial Day weekend, May the 25th in Las Vegas, Nevada. It was last May that Velasquez destroyed Silva at UFC 146, but since that time, Silva has notched victories over Travis Brown and Alistair Overeem. That same card will also feature the return of Junior Dos Santos taking on Alistair Overeem, with the winner likely earmarked for a title shot against the main event victor. And the UFC has announced two more female signings to bolster their bantamweight division, with Olympic silver medalist Sarah McMahon being inked to a contract, along with Canadian Alexis Davis. This comes right after the announcement that Miesha Tate will fight Kat Zingano at the Tough 17 finale April 13th. And finally, Randy Couture was a guest on SiriusXM's Fight Club and laid out his desire to be a bigger part of the UFC following his retirement in 2011, and was not satisfied merely having a role on the Fox broadcasts. Couture stated he signed a non-disclosure agreement with Spike TV and could not let the UFC know, and felt that Matt Hughes' recent job appointment as Vice President of Athlete Development and Government Affairs was a giant, quote, F you to Couture. Joined by Robin Black, and Robin, we do what we do every day, and that is chat about fights, and a number of them coming our way via the UFC. Vitor Belfort, Luke Rockhold, they are on the books for a future card this year in Brazil, date to be announced. Interesting that Vitor Belfort, after it was revealed that he has been given an exemption to use testosterone replacement therapy, on another international card. Coincidence?
Hard to say, man. I mean, your point is good. I mean, internationally, they don't test the way they do in America. The UFC will do some testing, but man, it's starting to get to be a slippery slope. We could talk about the use of steroids and performance-enhancing drugs pretty much every chat now. It's so prevalent in the sport, and
we should do that every single day. Our thoughts on drugs.
You know, it's a strange thing, man. It's like, you can't just take one opinion anymore, because you need to look at the influence of pressure on some of these athletes. You need to look at the culture. I mean, you need to look at the demands of winning, all of these things. What drives a person? There's so much to this.
That aside, Vitor Belfort gets a W here over Luke Rockhold. How do you not give this guy a title shot? You know, whether you agree or disagree, the fact is he is simply going by the letter of the law. The UFC has rubber stamped this TRT exemption, and Vitor Belfort with the victory here, that is as solid a case at 185 pounds as anybody.
Yeah, you know, the funny thing with Vitor Belfort is you kind of assume he's older than he is because he started so young. He's still young, but he's got tons and tons of experience. Everybody knows who he is. He's a superstar in Brazil and recognized by the hardcores everywhere. And for Luke Rockhold, man, he still needs to prove something. He's had some great wins in Strikeforce, but he's also kind of called out too many people and had fights not kind of materialize and stuff. This is his fight to prove himself, and Vitor will not be walked on. I like it.
We head on over Memorial Day weekend. It is going to be two big heavyweight fights coming our way. Cain Velasquez defending his heavyweight title against the man he fought on Memorial Day weekend last year and annihilated in Antonio Bigfoot Silva. This announcement was made by Ariel Helwani on UFC Tonight. First of all, we've talked about it. The heavyweight picture, after that Overeem loss, there was no clear-cut #1 contender, and they're going with Antonio Silva, who I really feel that Junior Dos Santos, I want to see him have another fight before a rematch, and they're going the Bigfoot direction.
Hey man, there was a perfect fight. There was a perfect contender, but that contender's ego just got way too excited, and his gas tank went down as his hands dropped, and he got knocked out by Bigfoot. So it's Bigfoot's shot now, and Cain Velasquez just murdered Bigfoot in that first fight, and there's really no reason to
Will there be any
think
highlights of that in the countdown show?
I don't know,
because
man.
that was a 10-8 round. Had that fight not stopped, he just sliced open Silva.
But, you know, sometimes we've seen this before in combat sports where suddenly Mike Tyson can beat everybody. When somebody is that good and when somebody is dominant and they are smashing people, it does capture our interest. We are interested in seeing if Cain Velasquez, other than that 1 60-second knockout, the guy has looked like potentially the best heavyweight fighter of all time. So do we want to see him smash in another fight? Yes. And hey, man, Bigfoot, he showed that you can't count him out.
On the other side of that Memorial Day weekend card will be a #1 contenders bout between former champion Junior Dos Santos and the aforementioned Alistair Overeem. I think this is a lock that the winner of this fight will get the winner of the main event. And for Alistair Overeem, I think that we're going to see a much more refocused Alistair Overeem than we saw a couple of weeks back.
Well, you better, because Junior Dos Santos has just some very nice hands, some nice footwork. As long as he mentally comes back right from the beating he took from Velasquez, he should be able to go in there. And if Overeem looks anything like he looked in his last fight, this will be Dos Santos all day.
Those fights are coming up, but we also wanted to touch upon the vote that happened on Tuesday in Switzerland by the International Olympic Committee to eliminate wrestling effective with the 2020 Summer Games. So 2016 would be the final games where they would feature wrestling. A bit of a stunning vote here. A lot of people are thinking that modern pentathlon would be gone, but instead the IOC making a very interesting vote here. And this really has a huge trickle-down effect in terms of people that are going to be getting into amateur wrestling, the funding that is going to be going into USA Wrestling after this when there are no Olympic Games. I mean, there could be lots of repercussions because of this. I was stunned by this.
This is a huge loss for America, really. I mean, the Russians, the Americans, and the Iranians, outside of that, there's not all that much, that many cultures that builds wrestling as one of their key elements. So it's the Russians and the Americans who are hurt the most by this. And the Americans, kids grow up entering wrestling to become an Olympian. You take that away and all of a sudden wrestling, there's no real, other thing to strive for unless you're going to take a 14-year-old and convince him he's going to fight in the UFC. It'll affect mixed martial arts, it'll affect the Olympics, it'll affect wrestling, it'll affect sport in America. It's a terrible thing.
Yeah, and you mentioned the fact that, a lot of people, they don't get into wrestling for the fame, the money, and also the barrier for entry is next to zero. Anyone can wrestle. You don't need, the high amount of buying equipment, going to practice that you do for so many other sports. I think a big loss, but one nonetheless that we will continue to follow here. But we will be continuing with more as Fight News Now Extra continues.